Hey folks, the Critical Labour Studies event at Ruskin has just finished, so I thought I'd just take this opportunity just to do this overview video for you for the March workshop. At the end of the video there's a couple of interviews with colleagues who presented over the weekend. One of those is Jack Xiaobeng Chow from Kiel, who's coming to talk to us about the rise of independent workers' trade unions in China, and generally the rise of workers' resistance to capitalism in China. Just a couple of things about CLS. The full-time students presented their research proposals to the symposium this morning. It went down really well, and I think it'd be good if part-time students could have a chat to the full-time students about that process of putting together the paper for an academic event and presenting it, because I would like more of the part-time students to come to the CLS event next year and present papers based on their own ongoing research, because there are a number of you that I know have spoken to me about the idea of formally disseminating your research outcomes, and conferences is a really good way of doing that. I've sent out the paperwork, and apologies again for that being late. It's just been really difficult recently to manage kind of workload generally, but there are a number of the speakers for March who it was just difficult to get hold of. As you've seen, it's the usual packed few days. So let me just introduce you to the weekend, because there's a hell of a lot going on, and there are kind of key themes here. If we just separate out the sessions of Sue Ledwith in the morning on Friday and Joe Kane in the morning on Tuesday, those are the very typical Module 2 sessions, very much about trade union structure and culture and organisation. Sue's particularly looking at issues of gender. In essence, what happens to pay bargaining when a trade union culturally has a masculine orientation? It comes out of research that Sue's been doing in Brazil and South Africa, and the reading for this I think captures really well the structures and methodology of that research approach. Really useful for the part-timers that to always look at the methodology of a piece of research and see what you can learn from it. Similarly, Joe's session, the title of that, Changing Union Roles, Strategy, Culture and Leadership, is really just trying to unpick what informs culture within trade unions as organisations, as institutions. That's a really live session. Well, you'll be asked to think about your own trade union experience as well. So those two very typical of Module 2. The sessions by Stephen Muschin and Miguel Martinez-Lucio and Jack from Kiel are at an international level. Stephen's session and Miguel's session is very much around what's happening to collective bargaining. As collective bargaining shrinks at a national level, what options are there, particularly for workers employed globally by the same multinational, of structuring international level collective bargaining? I've sent some material that Stephen sent me to pass on, but I've also sent some material about international framework agreements. That was one of the issues being discussed at the CLS symposium this weekend, because IFAs or global framework agreements tend to be the major area of analysis and debate currently about how we attempt to generate a floor or even a ceiling actually for workers' conditions globally when they're employed by a multinational. Jack's session, really interested in this. Is a particular interest of mine, what's happening in China as the kind of hothouse of capitalism globally. Over the past few decades there's been a definite rise in the volume of independent workers' resistance to authoritarianism on the part of the state itself, on the part of employers, or through the state's manipulation of the single trade union that exists in China, the All China Trade Union Federation. And Jack's going to use a case study of a strike a couple of years ago involving dock workers to kind of illustrate patterns of workers' resistance. I've sent quite a bit of reading for that. It's selfish really, it's because it's an area of interest of mine. But I think it really does epitomise the capacity for workers to resist even under authoritarian regimes. My session on Sunday very much links in with the guest speaker session of Jane Holgate and Becca Kirkpatrick, which is two things really. It's both local and global. It's about this whole notion of community unionism and social movement unionism, which in a nutshell is to do with the growing need for trade unions to work with other civil society actors. Best represented, for example, with Becca's work with Unison. For example, in the West Midlands, Becca used to be a Unison activist, and I've known her for some time. She's really well placed to give a sense of whether trade unions are able to work with other organisations and devolve power, share responsibility. So although there's a local feel here, there's very much also a regional, a kind of European level or North American level, an international feel, because when you look at the reading that I've sent you, it's also about what we refer to as cross-border organising. So, for example, one of the sessions yesterday, Roger Mackenzie, Assistant General Secretary at Unison, talking about the problems of trying to organise workers in the UK who've come from the Philippines, for example, and the need to work with Filipino unions, organising workers for Unison before they come into the UK. It's not a new approach. It's worked really well, though. It's worked really well, for example, unions organising agricultural workers in North America have worked very well with not so much trade unions but other organisations like churches in Latin America, making them conscious of trade union structures in North America, how to get in touch with trade unions, and even if they're not signing them up before they cross the border, they're certainly getting them attuned to why it's important to join a trade union. Saturday evening we'll have Ethel Buckley from SIP2 join us. I haven't quite worked out yet what her session will be, but she's the activist in residence at Ruskin that week. And just one other thing, just about the structure. I know I'd made a mistake here. I'd said that Helen Nolan was going to be the alumni on Saturday afternoon. That was always going to be Holly Smith. Sorry, I'd got the name wrong. Holly can't make it, so what we're going to do is two things. Fenella and I will talk about dissertation preparation again, particularly aiming at the part-timers. But we're going to be joined by a colleague of mine, Dennis Gregory. Dennis used to head ILTUS, but also run the Trade Union Research Unit at Ruskin. He's going to talk about research methods in the context of a large-scale piece of research he's currently undertaking around bargaining. So it's going to be a connection with Stephen and Miguel's session that involves Ruskin College, the Labour Studies Centre in Slovakia, and based at the University of Amsterdam, the Institute for Advanced Labour Studies. He's going to be looking at how to analyse collective bargaining, whether around pay or other issues as well. So that's a really good way to look at research from a very live research project, European level research project. I'm going to send some reading on that this week, and you'll get that in advance of the weekend. But a really good live session on research, and then Fenella and I will follow that with another session on preparing for the dissertation. I think one of the things we'll talk about is something called the literature review. So that's the weekend. I think that's most of the things for the weekend. Can I just encourage you please to have a look at the notes for preparing for the workshop on pages 2 and 3 of the weekend outline. There's a lot going on, but what I'm particularly keen to do is get colleagues to think about, for example, you've now had your feedback from the first summative, how to get the best out of that feedback in terms of not just the tutorial, but drawing on it guidance that perhaps you can discuss with learning development. Ultimately, how to draw from that feedback in readiness for both the next summative but also the dissertation as well. I'll be doing a little bit of that on Sunday afternoon, actually. There's a session there, feedback on module 1 assignment and related issues. So I really want to talk about how we build from your research and your writing into the next stages. Because the MA is fast moving along. After this weekend, we're into the final module of year 1 for the part-timers, and the final module for the full-timers as well. Then for the part-timers we're into research methods, and then before you know it, we're in June, that's the final weekend, and you're into the field work. So it moves along at a hell of a pace, the MA. I'm sure you appreciate that as much as I do. It's going to be a really good weekend. There's going to be a lot going on, so I do hope you enjoy it. So this video is followed by 2 interviews with colleagues who presented papers over the weekend. I've just picked these 2 because one of them is Jack, and there's another young woman called Denat. Both really interesting, just a flavour of CLS really. Looking forward to seeing you all at the March workshop. Please get in touch if before then you've got any issues. Thanks a lot. Bye bye. Thank you very much for freeing up some time just for this short video. Just as a bit of introduction for the students, this is one of the videos of a colleague who presented a paper at CLS over the weekend, and I've just asked them just to speak a little bit about the paper, which links actually to one of the case studies that we've used on the MA before. So, Demet, first of all, can I just ask you just to introduce yourself, please?
My name is Demet Dinler. I'm from Turkey. I recently completed a PhD in development studies at SOAS University of London, and I'm currently teaching in the Organization Studies program at Bilgi University, Istanbul, Turkey.
Wonderful, that's great. And could you provide an overview, before we go on to the core issues I'd like to ask you about, could you just provide an overview of your presentation, please?
Yes, my presentation was about the UPS campaign, of which I was a coordinator in Turkey from 2010 to 2011.
Yeah.
The campaign was a joint campaign organized by the local transport union and the International Transport Workers Federation. The UPS local management fired 163 workers who joined the ITF affiliated union in Turkey. And the local union has started a picket line in front of the UPS transfer centers.
Yeah.
And we wanted to make it an international campaign. So the ITF has helped the union to organize global action days, has sought support both in Europe, in North America, and in other regions. The campaign was very special because it relied on a multiplicity of strategies.
Yeah.
On the one hand, it organized solidarity actions by transport unions all over the world. On the other hand, it also skillfully used diplomatic relations by specific individuals to reach out to the main people at the UPS Atlanta management.
Yeah.
Because as you know, in a globalized world, the local management of multinational companies are not sufficient to negotiate. The global managers have to put pressure on their local managers to achieve significant results. So thanks to those diplomatic links and thanks to those international solidarity actions, but also thanks to the wonderful struggles that the workers have carried out on the ground for 9 months, by raising awareness in the public in Turkey, by organizing demonstrations, by building solidarity, the UPS management finally agreed to negotiate with the union. And as a result of 9 months, not only most of the fired workers were reinstated, but the union was allowed to continue its campaign activities freely at the workplace. However, the real difficulty started after the reinstatement process because, according to the legal structure in Turkey, unions can only obtain legal authority to represent workers and to sign a collective bargaining agreement as long as they organize 50% plus one of the overall workforce employed by the UPS. By the time the UPS direct employees in Turkey were 3,000 and subcontracted workers were 2,000 or so. So we had lots of work to do. So the union started spending a lot of energy in increasing its members to reach that threshold. Myself and my other colleague, who was the campaign manager, project manager of the campaign, Molly McGrath, and the ITF staff, we decided to support the second phase of the campaign by integrating the UPS workers more into the building of the strategy via a training method.
Oh, right, yeah.
So the UPS had workplaces in around 30 cities all over Turkey. The biggest cities were, of course, like places such as Izmir, Ankara, Istanbul, but there were also other important transfer centers in the south, Adana in the southeast, Gaziantep, for instance. So we decided to travel to those cities and to do meetings with UPS workers who were already members of the union. Our aim, our idea was to work with workers to analyze the situation altogether and to identify workplace problems to prepare for the writing of the collective bargaining agreement in the future, but also to improve organizing strategy. In each city, we had workshops with workers, participatory workshops. And the ideas we were relying on were coming from different sources. First, the ITF had prepared a fantastic organizing manual to be used in training programs. So I was at the moment translating that manual into Turkish. And there are great organizing methods coming, for instance, from the Latin American network Arbolitos. Perhaps you know the Arbolitos method, for instance. I was also very much inspired by the ideas of Paulo Freire and critical pedagogy. I already had lots of teaching experience with students back in school, so I was hoping to use those ideas in our meetings with workers. There is also this book which I mentioned in the presentation, Jacques Rancière's Ignorant Schoolmaster, where he says that the main purpose of the teacher is not to go to the poor and the oppressed and tell them what they should know, but to help their mental emancipation by bringing the potential out of themselves, by making them feel that they have the mental capacity to learn something. Those ideas were important in designing those workshops, during which we did the following things. First, we did a mapping exercise to map the transfer centers of the UPS company. So workers were invited to do that mapping by feeling as if they are the micro-sociology of their own workplace, sociologists of their own workplace. We were analyzing work categories and we were asking the following question: which type of workers are more willing to join the unions, which others are reluctant, and why? So we were problematizing. We were trying to think about the pros and cons for joining a union, and we were doing small exercises to think about how we can formulate constructive arguments to persuade other workers to join the union. We also did the mapping of the business operations of the UPS to identify the customers, because in each city there were contracts with different customers. And you know, in a trade union strategy, identifying customers is important, because in case of a crisis, you can always put pressure, use that relationship with the customer as a leverage on the company. So I could see gradually how the workers were transforming into strategists during those exercises. We also did a mapping of what I call authority and resistance at the workplace. In Turkey, the authoritarian and arbitrary behavior of the supervisors are a very important problem for workers, sometimes even more important than the wage problem, because when workers feel that their dignity is humiliated, so they feel very, very powerless. So we were trying to understand what kind of psychological tactics the supervisors were using in oppressing workers, and what kind of interesting tactics of resistance the workers were developing themselves to feel more powerful. And what my role was a little bit to transmit one experience from one city to the other while traveling in my between training times. And we were coming also with some formulations to solve problems. We were identifying workplace problems according to their priorities. And while the time for drafting the CBA came, I had a pool of problems and ideas about how to transform those problems into CBA articles. And at the same time, I also read the CBA signed by other unions in Europe and the United States to see what those other workers were doing. And I was translating those to the workers in Turkey. And they were also getting inspired because they could see that it is possible to change things. If others did, they could do it as well.
Absolutely.
We were also able to identify very talented worker leaders during those trainings. People who, even before the training, were very intelligent enough to set benchmarks for their organizing strategy at their own workplaces, to solve problems. They were good people in whom other workers had confidence. They were problem solvers, mentors, mediators at the workplace. So I wrote down all the things that they were doing. So it was a learning process for myself as well. And I wrote detailed reports about all those trainings and identified individuals who could be perhaps future worker leaders, branch managers for the trade union. And at the time, since I was also attending ITF conferences where different trade unions in logistics sector, like I don't know if you know, but there's this network of the ITF from the global logistics company, DHL, UPS. So it was a very great learning resource for me to learn what those logistics trade unions are doing. And one of the things that some of them were doing was to have a network structure in all over the country, to have representatives from different regions and the cities, and they were coming together to make decisions. So our idea was to do the same thing in Turkey by bringing the UPS workers together to share experiences and to also empower themselves. Because worker-to-worker relationship, as many people admit, is still the most important aspect of organizing. And while they were learning those experiences and when they were invited to think intellectually about organizing, I think we could also make the distinctions between mental and manual labor more and more blurred. Because a trade union activity, they were realizing, was not only something related to bread and butter issues, which is of course very important, but also to feel emancipated, to feel that they have the power to think freely and to change a reality, the social reality in which they are embedded.
That's fantastic. Actually, you've answered a couple of the questions I was going to ask you as a follow-on. Great. No, don't apologise. It's fantastic because what I was going to ask you as a follow-on, Dermot, was just to talk a little more about the role of education within there as well, and what it does for workers. Because I was saying earlier on, there's a certain ambition with the BA and the MA programs at Ruskin that they kind of realise that. So is it true to say then, just in terms of particular outcomes that you feel were effective, would you say that it was the educational components that were the most effective aspects of the campaign overall?
This is there is this slogan of the education department at the ITF. They say that the training does not follow organizing. I mean, we do training for organizing. Training is a very, very important tool for organizing. So I could say that yes, the education helps to better organize workers, first of all, but not only experts who give education, but the workers becoming their own educators, and also peer-to-peer education. Although this wasn't something that we could achieve, one of our aims was to choose worker leaders to give them an intensive training program, and then they will go back to their workplaces and train their fellow workers, which is again an idea coming from Priory. So yes, I would agree that education is a very important component for organizing, but also education is very important as an end in itself for the labor movement, because it helps individual workers to build self-confidence. You know, at the workplace, every day until the trade union activity, workers were subject to the humiliations of the employers. And they could only think about doing their own work, and they felt loss of alienation, according to my interviews. They felt that the time they were spending at the workplace was a lost time. There's so much research finding which suggests that the workplace is a place where workers do not feel that what they are. Feel empty, that their time is not theirs. But thanks to that, I think, experience, suddenly the work that they started feeling more control over what they were doing. I think we couldn't perhaps achieve in a short period of time of 6 months, but they started feeling more autonomous as well. And autonomy is one of the most important objectives that a trade union can achieve for its members.
No, that's fantastic. That's a great way of just kind of summarising this, because it kind of feeds into a lot of some of the current themes around labour studies. There's one of the MA students, for example, looking at theories around organisational misbehaviour. And also, I think one of the latest books on organisational misbehaviour, I think, has got the title Empty Time, and how workers kind of fill that particular space. But Gemma, that was fantastic. A really good piece of analysis. Thank you very much.
I want to say one last point.
Sure, please do.
It's a great thing what you are doing here at Ruskin, because it's something that we in Turkey should try to learn. Because if there is more research and more analysis done by trade unions, if they develop those skills more, I think they have a better idea of what they want to change.
Sure, absolutely.
So congratulations. And very, very nice to have this interview with you as well.
Lovely, that's great. Can I just ask you to just introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Jack Shibing-Cao from Keele University.
Jack, can I just ask you a question just based on the session you're going to do in March with the MA students, which is, what is it about that dock workers dispute that tells us much more about globalisation from a trade union perspective? Because I know in your presentation now at CLS, that was a major theme of your presentation. So just as a bit of a taster for the students at March.
I'm going to introduce a strike event in China 2 years ago. It happened in one of the biggest seaport in China. It was a result of the globalization which led to the squeeze of labor cost and the reduction of working hours as well as redundancies. As a result of that, workers took spontaneous strike action because they didn't trust their union. Although they had the first Chinese trade union which was elected in Chinese seaport industry. But the event went on when the trade union was brought in to help the negotiation process. But it doesn't mean trade union has got enough representation power, because fundamentally they are still not independent from government and employers.
Sure. So one of the things that you talked about in your presentation was deriving a different form of trade union power, associational power.
It does. Sometimes some delicate power transform had happened during this process, because strike workers wanted unions to help them. The union was given temporary management of discontent to help workers' bargaining power. But fundamentally, it is still workers' own bargaining power that matters.
Wonderful. Listen, that's fantastic. Just a bit of a taster before the session in March, where students will meet you face to face. Thank you very much.
Thank you.